A terrible complex topic with many different perspectives have to be understood when looking at OER. So I will concentrate on just giving you some basic concepts which might help you to understand OER a little bit better. And hopefully with the help of the other talks from Fred and Mitya later on, you might have then a complete nutshell at the end of the day. I would like to start with two examples. There's first the project which is currently running in Wales, and it's called the OER World Simro. They have a nice slogan, a small country with big ideas. And I think what is remarkable about this project is that it's driven by I think 11 Welsh universities. Probably these are all the Welsh universities. And they decided to cooperate together on OER. Actually, their budget was initially not very high, but they did quite some things. They started awareness building, they developed champions and some internal know-how. They supported the OER conference, the OER 15 was there, and they also have a showcase which presents some of the OER produced in the project. Another project which is currently being started in Germany is the Hamburg Open Online University. It's right now still more a concept. I'm not sure how far they have approached, but again, it's quite interesting to see that it's a project driven by 6 Hamburg universities or higher education institutions. And they also have a clear commitment to OER, and it's open for everyone. They are aiming to building a digital university which is open for everyone. And so again, I think this is a very interesting project from its architecture on. And two very early conclusions from these examples. The first one is OER is about exchanging competition through cooperation. I do not mean that cooperation will be completely replaced by that competition will completely be replaced by cooperation. This would be too easy. But I think that competition and cooperation have always been two very major motives in human development. And I think what we are observing right now is that we have to renegotiate the borders between these two concepts and come up with a new balanced way which maybe emphasizes cooperation a little bit more than it does right now. It's some years ago that Don Tapscott wrote in his very readable or very interesting book, Wikinomics, that it's quite usual for some industry to build joint research knowledge bases. So they are cooperating together in the field of basic research, and they are then making out of this products which are competing to each other. And I think this is a quite good model which could be valuable for higher education institutes as well. If the global higher education institutions would start building a joint knowledge base, they would still continue to compete with the products they are building out of this knowledge base. The second conclusion is that now is the time for systemic adoption. It's at the Berlin conference 2013, Neil Butcher from South Africa said that despite many very excellent OER projects, he was not yet seeing any systemic adoption. So he said we need to take this idea of OER and make it bring it to the systemic level, which means to a complete institutional level or to a complete country level, and I think that the examples mentioned at the beginning give some hope that this will happen in the near future. There are other examples as well, and one of them is the Opening Up Slovenia project, which will be introduced by Mitja later on. So what is OER? There are several OER definitions, and one of them is the UNESCO definition. Probably you have read it in advance when you had a look at the materials which have been sent to you. And the main thing about this definition is that OER is open educational material plus an open license. And these licenses are little contracts which are attracted or attached to the document so that they can be given to everyone who gets the document in his hands. And this is a very important aspect because what is not openly licensed is not OER. And some of the MOOCs which have been mentioned by Professor Krieger do not use open licenses, and therefore they are not considered to be real OER. So let's see a little bit more about what openness means, and therefore David Wiley developed his 5R framework, and this shows you pretty well what features must be supported by an open license. The first thing is you've got to retain the material, so you're allowed to download it and store it on your computer. You're allowed to use the material. You can use it in your classroom or for any other purpose. You're allowed to revise it, so you can change it in any way you like to. You can remix it with other material, and you're allowed to redistribute it. And there's the difference between open material, which is licensed and non-licensed. Point 1 and 2 would be fit for non-licensed material as well, and the points 3 to 5 are only possible in a legal way if it's open license. So there's enormous potential in this. Just to show you a little bit about the license mechanics. Earlier, if you wanted to have a book, this is an example from school sector, you had to write it completely, and right now you can simply take one of these existing open license books and you can then translate it, you can localize the contents, you can put in localized examples and names and currencies, whatever you have to change the material to make it fit to your special needs, and then you can put other material in it if not everything is in it what you need. And then you can make a new book out of it and publish it and redistribute it. And this is actually the way, more or less, the first German OER school book, which is here presented from Schulbuch-Omat, was developed, I think, back in 2013. Yes, OER is quite a complex topic. And to show you a little bit about the different ways OER can appear, I developed a diagram, and I named it the OER perspective cube. And actually in the middle there is a cube, and it has 3 sides, and on the top of the side, I hope everyone can read it, we have 3 different educational sectors. On the left side we have different types of material, and on the right side we have different types of institutions who can produce OER. So let's have a closer look at this. When you look at the top side of the cube, you can see school, higher education, and further education. It's not complete. There are other sectors of education which are missing in this diagram. For example, there's early childhood education, which is not on there, and there's the big sector of informal learning, which is not on it. And, but I think it's quite helpful to look from this perspective to see that one of the most important advantages of OER is that the material can cross borders between the sectors. So what is being produced in higher education can be used in schools and in further education as well. And this is also true very much for informal learning. On the left side we have the different types of materials which can be OER. The main idea, they're standing courses, books, and worksheets. The main idea is that we have very small elements of resources like learning atoms or learning objects, which might be just an idea or a diagram or something, and that you can then set them together and get more complex things like books and courses. And actually in higher education it's quite remarkable that courses have played a very important role from the beginning on, starting with the MIT OpenCourseWare project, where they decided to publish accompanying materials of their courses online. Normally these are video lectures and some slides and other things which are there. There in this category would also be the MOOCs we already spoke about, though these are a little bit more difficult. They have to be discussed in detail because not all MOOCs are really OER. The second row refers to the books. Some people say the book is dead in the time of digital information. I don't agree to this point of view. I think it's still very important, and if you look at the American discussion, for example, the American OER discussion is very much focused on books, and their aim is to save money by changing to open educational resources. Last but not least, there are small pieces of OER, and if you want to start with OER, this might be a good thing to start with. Just take a little publication you are preparing for your students and try to make it an OER. Last but not least, coming to the right side of the cube, there we have the different forms of producers of OER, and there are public NGOs and commercial producers. Public would be like universities or museums or broadcasting agencies. NGOs, we have very important players like Wikimedia, or in Germany there's a portal which is called Verdo, which is completely private. And last but not least, OER is open to commercial publishers as well. They have to completely change their business model, but in theory it would be no problem to work on OERs for commercial publishers as well. Behind these three columns you can see the word crowd, and this refers to the word crowdsourcing, and it means that OER is open to social production. So if you have a community who is willing to participate in developing and improving your resource, this can be done with OER. And if you look at different OER projects, it's always very helpful to see how intense is the participation of the crowd. Is it only a very traditional project where a university is producing a book and putting an open license on it, or is there really a community which is working on it? And this again makes completely different models of OER, and if you take all this together you can see that there are many different business models of OER. And I sometimes think that the discussion is still not differentiated enough. It's sometimes you're talking about OER quality, but that's too simple. You have to say in which educational sector, for which concrete resource, and produced by whom you're speaking about. So it's a very complicated thing. Just one short sentence to the circle around it. It mentions the different perspectives which are necessary if you want to understand OER completely. So I think it's a phenomenon which you have to approach in a holistic way. So there are legal aspects, social aspects. You need to have business models. Technical systems play an important role, and for sure there's a pedagogical aspect to it as well. So, different kind of openness, especially in the field of higher education, there are quite a lot of different approaches. OER isn't the only open approach, but there are a lot of other open approaches. We have open education, we have open educational resources, open educational practices. I'm going to explain this later. We have open science, open access, open data, open source, open government. So this is really very, very confusing. And the interesting thing is that all these topics are discussed in more or less isolated communities. It's not really geared with each other, but it's different people speaking about different topics. And I try to make it a little bit more clear. And I said, okay, look at open science first and take it as the open scientific system or the scientific system which adopts open approaches. Then we have one part open research and one part open education. When writing down this diagram, I found that it's interesting that right now what is currently discussed as open science is really not open science but open research. So open science should include open research and open education. And within these systems, you have open educational resources and open access, which are very closely combined to each other. So I once read a tweet which said that there are two fraternal twins, which are very similar but not identical. We have also open data, and if you take these three together, you could argue that these three make up an open scientific publishing system. And I introduced this term of the open scientific publishing system because I thought that's a very good description about what happens when you're speaking about OER. Let's see. Before OER, we had the situation that the educational publishing system was being taken out of the scientific system. That's not completely true, but we can simplify it like this. And after OER, what happens is that the scientific publishing system re-enters the scientific system. So it becomes part again. And what is very interesting then is if it gets combined to the learning system, which I'm meaning the educational staff and the students, what happens then is open educational practices. And this means that the teachers and learners are starting to use the educational publishing system to find new ways of teaching. And examples for this would be very simple things like just keeping a learning block. When I started OER, I started blogging in an approached age, and I found it very, very rewarding to work and to publish my own thoughts, and I learned quite a lot of it. Other examples would be things like putting up a wiki to jointly document your topic. Or a very interesting example I learned from Sandra Hufoys was that it's possible to introduce an undergraduate research journal where students can publish their research results. All these are open educational practices. MOOCs in special forms, especially in the forms of CMOOCs, are open educational practices as well. And there's a lot of potential in there. And I think it's just a very new term. And the discussion is going from open educational resources to open educational practices. I'm coming to the end of my short talk and want to present you some of the advantages of OER. These are have been delivered by Professor Dirk van Dam at the last Open Education Consortia conference in Banff, and I think it's also probably the essence of the next OECD report, which will be published in November this year. And the OECD is arguing that these new forms of learning I just mentioned is probably the biggest potential of OER. They also argue that teachers' collaboration is a benefit of OER. I think that we still have the situation that teachers are kind of lone warriors and they have not yet started to become team players. They argue that OER has the potential to reduce public and private costs. That's quite interesting as well, and it's interesting to see that this argument is more dominant in some countries like the US, while in Europe it seems to be a little bit more focused on the new forms of learning. Quality of resources is another benefit. There's a very controversial discussion about this. Publishers say that the quality of OER is poor, and OER advocates argue that OER is a way to improve quality. So this is a very emotionally led discussion there. And the last one I would like to mention is the distribution of resources, and this is quite interesting, especially I think that probably UNESCO would say this is a more important aspect of OER because everything which is produced will be open to everyone on the world, and so OER might be a very, very powerful tool to solve the actual global educational crisis. And having said this, I'm coming to the end. I expect that Fred Mulder is going to maybe tell us a little bit more about this aspect and about the opinion of UNESCO. Thanks very much for your attention.